The Shrine Auditorium in Los Angeles stood bathed in golden light on the evening of February 26, 1985. Outside, limousines lined the streets for blocks, their doors opening to release the most recognizable faces in music history. Inside, 80,000 seats filled with an electricity that seemed to make the very air shimmer. This was not just another Grammy Awards ceremony. This was the night when the two greatest performers of a generation would occupy the same stage, the same building, the same moment in time. Michael Jackson had arrived early, his sequined military jacket catching every light, his single white glove already the most photographed accessory in the world. He sat in the front row, perfectly composed, his dark eyes taking in everything while revealing nothing. 3 rows back, Prince had positioned himself with calculated precision, dressed in purple from head to toe, his hair cascading in perfect curls, his gaze fixed not on the stage but on the back of Michael's head. The audience knew. Everyone in that auditorium knew. The tension between these two titans had been building for years, a rivalry so intense it had become the subject of magazine covers, television specials, and endless speculation. They had never performed together. They had barely spoken. And now, on this night, they were both nominated for Album of the Year. The silence before the show began felt almost sacred, as if the entire music industry was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen when these two forces finally collided in the same space. The ceremony proceeded with the usual pageantry. Winners climbed the stage, tears streaming down their faces as they clutched their golden gramophones. Performances came and went, each one magnificent in its own right, but the audience remained restless, distracted, waiting for something more. Michael had already won 2 awards that night, accepting them with his characteristic soft-spoken grace, his voice barely above a whisper as he thanked God, his family, and his fans. Prince had won one, and his acceptance speech consisted of exactly 7 words before he walked off stage, leaving the teleprompter operator scrambling. The contrast could not have been more stark. Michael, the consummate showman who had spent his entire life learning how to give an audience exactly what it wanted. Prince, the musical genius who refused to play by anyone's rules but his own. As the night wore on, crew members began setting up for Michael's scheduled performance of his new single. The stage transformed into a recreation of a city street, complete with fake storefronts, street lamps, and a full dance crew waiting in the wings. Michael stood backstage, going through his breathing exercises, his fingers moving through the choreography he had rehearsed 10,000 times. This performance had been planned for months. Every step, every spin, every vocal run had been mapped out with military precision. Nothing was left to chance. Nothing could go wrong. Then Prince stood up. The movement was so sudden, so unexpected, that several people in his row actually gasped. He moved through the aisle with the confidence of someone who owned not just the stage but the entire concept of performance itself. He walked past ushers who tried to stop him, past security guards who recognized him and stepped aside, past celebrities who turned in their seats to watch. He walked straight down the center aisle, his purple boots clicking against the floor in a rhythm that seemed to announce his intentions to everyone watching. Michael was still backstage when word reached him. Someone whispered in his ear that Prince was walking toward the stage. Michael's head turned slightly, his expression unreadable behind the makeup and the carefully constructed public persona he wore like armor. The audience began to murmur, a low rumble of confusion and anticipation that grew louder with each step Prince took. He reached the stairs leading up to the stage and he did not hesitate. He climbed them slowly, deliberately, and when he reached the top, he turned to face the audience. 80,000 people fell absolutely silent. Not a cough, not a whisper, not the rustle of a program. Prince reached up and unplugged one of the microphones that had been set up for Michael's performance. He held it in his hand like a weapon, like a challenge, like a declaration of war. His voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Michael Jackson is about to perform," he said, his words echoing through the sound system with crystal clarity. "But before he does, I want everyone in this room to know something. I want everyone watching at home to know something. Michael is great. Michael is a legend. But tonight, right here, right now, I'm challenging him to something different. Not a competition. Not a battle. Something this industry has never seen before. The audience erupted. Some people cheered. Others shouted in confusion. Camera operators scrambled to reframe their shots. Directors in the control booth screamed into their headsets. Producers ran through the aisles trying to figure out how to handle what was quickly becoming the most unpredictable moment in Grammy history. Michael was still backstage, and now everyone was looking at him, waiting to see how he would respond. His dancers stood frozen in their positions, their mouths open in shock. His choreographer grabbed his arm, saying something urgent, probably telling him to ignore it, to stick to the plan, to not let Prince derail months of preparation. But Michael was not looking at his choreographer. He was looking at the monitor showing Prince standing on his stage, holding his microphone, challenging him in front of the entire world. And then, for the first time that night, Michael smiled. He walked onto that stage with a grace that made it look like he was floating. The audience saw him emerge from the wings, and the sound they made was not quite a scream and not quite a roar, but something in between. Something primal and electric that seemed to shake the building's foundation. Michael did not look at the audience. He looked only at Prince. The two men stood 15 feet apart. Two legends, two geniuses, two completely different approaches to the same impossible dream of perfection. Prince spoke first. "I'm not here to upstage you, Michael. I'm here to make history with you. Right now. No rehearsal. No plan. Just two artists and whatever happens." Michael tilted his head slightly, that famous gesture that had been photographed a million times, and when he spoke, his voice was soft but everyone heard it. "What did you have in mind?" Prince gestured to the piano that sat stage left, an instrument that was supposed to be used later in the show for a completely different performance. "You sing. I play. We make something that has never existed before and will never exist again. Unless you're scared." The challenge was clear, and the audience understood what was happening. This was not about egos. This was not about competition. This was about two artists who had spent their entire lives being told they were the best, finally having the opportunity to create something together, something unrehearsed and raw and real. Michael walked to the microphone at center stage. Prince sat at the piano. The silence that fell over the Shrine Auditorium was so complete that people later swore they could hear their own heartbeats. Prince's fingers touched the keys, and the first notes that emerged were unlike anything anyone expected. It was not one of his songs. It was not one of Michael's songs. It was something entirely new, a melody that seemed to pull from gospel and funk and classical music all at once. A progression that climbed and fell and climbed again like a musical representation of the human spirit reaching for something it could not quite grasp. Michael stood perfectly still, listening, his eyes closed, his body swaying almost imperceptibly as he absorbed the music Prince was creating in real time. Then he began to sing. No one had given him lyrics. No one had told him what to say. But Michael Jackson had been singing since before he could walk, and his voice knew how to find the emotion in any melody, how to transform sound into feeling. He sang about dreams and struggle and the cost of greatness. He sang about two artists who had been told they could not coexist, who had been pitted against each other by an industry that thrived on division. He sang about finding common ground in the only language that had ever really mattered to either of them, music. The audience was weeping. Grown men and women, people who had seen everything, who thought they were beyond being moved by a simple performance, found tears streaming down their faces. In the third row, Quincy Jones sat with his hand over his mouth, his eyes wide with disbelief at what he was witnessing. In the balcony, young musicians who had scraped together every dollar to afford tickets gripped the railings in front of them, knowing they were watching something that would define their understanding of what music could be for the rest of their lives. Michael's voice soared over Prince's piano, the two sounds interweaving in a way that should not have been possible without rehearsal, without planning, without any of the structures that usually governed performance at this level. But this was not about structure. This was about two geniuses speaking the same language, understanding each other in a way that transcended words or preparation. Prince began to play harder, his fingers moving faster across the keys, pushing the tempo, challenging Michael to keep up, to match his intensity. Michael's voice rose to meet the challenge, hitting notes that seemed to defy human capability, bending them, shaping them, making them into something that sounded like joy and pain and triumph all at once. The two men locked eyes across the stage, and in that moment, something shifted. The rivalry, the competition, the years of being compared to each other, all of it fell away, and what remained was pure respect, pure recognition of what they saw in each other. If this story moves you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. These untold moments from music history deserve to be remembered and shared with the world. Prince stood up from the piano without warning. He walked across the stage, still playing in his mind even though his hands had left the keys, and he reached Michael's microphone just as Michael reached the climax of his improvised song. For 3 seconds, they shared that single microphone, their voices blending in harmony that had never been planned, never been practiced, but sounded like it had been destined since the beginning of time. The audience lost all composure. People jumped to their feet, screaming, crying, some of them so overcome with emotion they had to sit back down. The standing ovation began before the performance even ended, a wall of sound that competed with the music itself. Camera flashes erupted like lightning, everyone desperate to capture this moment, to have proof that it really happened. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The last note hung in the air, sustained by Michael's voice for an impossible length of time before finally fading into silence. Prince and Michael stood side by side, both breathing hard, both covered in sweat despite the air conditioning that kept the auditorium cool. They looked at each other, and without a word, without any discussion, they both knew they had just done something that would outlive them both. Prince extended his hand. Michael took it. The handshake lasted only a moment, but the photographer who captured it would later say it was the most powerful image he had ever taken. Two legends, two rivals, two completely different artists, connected by mutual respect and the shared understanding that greatness recognizes greatness. Prince leaned in close, his lips near Michael's ear, and whispered something that only Michael could hear. Years later, when asked what Prince said in that moment, Michael would smile that mysterious smile and say only, "He told me we should have done this years ago, and I told him we would do it again someday." But that someday never came. Life moved on, careers evolved, the industry changed, and the two men never shared a stage again. But for those who were in the Shrine Auditorium on February 26, 1985, for those 80,000 people who witnessed what happened that night, the memory remained as vivid and powerful as the moment itself. They told their children about it. They told their grandchildren. They described the silence before Prince walked down that aisle, the challenge in his voice, the grace in Michael's response, the tears that flowed as two geniuses created something that had never existed before and would never exist again. Backstage, after the cameras had stopped rolling and the audience had filed out into the Los Angeles night, Michael and Prince stood together in a hallway that connected their dressing rooms. The Grammy Awards staff hurried past them, breaking down sets, packing up equipment, already moving on to the next event, the next show, the next moment. But the two men stood still, neither one quite ready to leave, neither one quite ready to return to the separate worlds they inhabited. Prince pulled something from his pocket, a small purple guitar pick that he had used on countless recordings, on stages around the world, a talisman that had been with him through his entire career. He held it out to Michael without explanation, and Michael understood immediately. He reached into his own pocket and pulled out one of his signature white gloves, the left hand, not the right, the one he wore less frequently, but that meant just as much. They exchanged these objects in silence, a trade of talismans, a symbolic acknowledgement of what they had created together. Michael held the purple guitar pick in his palm, feeling its weight, understanding its significance. Prince slipped the white glove into his jacket pocket, where it would remain for years, a secret reminder of the night when competition became collaboration, when rivalry became respect. The industry tried to recreate it, of course. Producers called both men, suggesting official collaborations, album projects, world tours that would capitalize on the magic of that Grammy night. But both Michael and Prince declined every offer. They understood something the industry did not. What had happened on that stage was precious specifically because it was unrehearsed, unplanned, and unrepeatable. To try to manufacture it again would be to diminish what they had created. Some things exist perfect and complete in a single moment, and any attempt to recapture them would only create a shadow of the original. So they let it stand alone, a single point of light in music history, burning brighter because it stood in isolation. The footage of that performance became one of the most watched moments in television history. People who had not even been alive in 1985 discovered it on the internet decades later and felt the same chills, the same emotion, the same sense of witnessing something transcendent. Music students studied it in classes on improvisation and collaboration. Documentaries about both artists devoted entire segments to analyzing what happened that night. But no analysis could truly capture it. No breakdown of the musical theory could explain why it worked. It worked because two artists at the absolute peak of their powers chose, in a single spontaneous moment, to create rather than compete. Michael kept Prince's guitar pick in a small wooden box in his bedroom at Neverland Ranch. He never used it, never showed it to anyone, but sometimes, late at night when the world was quiet and he was alone with his thoughts, he would take it out and hold it, remembering the weight of Prince's hand in his, the sound of their voices blending at that shared microphone, the feeling of creating something perfect and fleeting. Prince kept Michael's glove in his Paisley Park studio, tucked into a drawer with other treasured objects from his career. He never wore it, never mentioned it in interviews, but those who worked closely with him would sometimes catch him looking at it, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth, and they knew he was thinking about that night, about the challenge he had issued and the way Michael had risen to meet it. Both men would go on to create more music, to break more records, to influence more generations. Michael would continue to redefine pop music and performance. Prince would continue to push boundaries and refuse to be categorized. But that night at the Grammys remained something special for both of them, a moment when the narrative of rivalry that the industry had constructed around them revealed itself to be false, or at least incomplete. They were rivals, yes, but they were also the only people on earth who truly understood what the other experienced, the pressure, the expectations, the loneliness of being exceptional. Years after both men had passed away, a museum dedicated to music history opened an exhibit about that Grammy night. The centerpiece was a recreation of the stage, complete with the piano Prince had played and the microphone they had shared. In a glass case at the center of the exhibit sat two objects, a purple guitar pick and a white glove. The placard explained their significance, told the story of the exchange, described what these items meant to the two legends who had owned them. But what the placard could not convey was the feeling in the room when these objects were first placed in the case, the way the curator's hands shook slightly as he positioned them, the way visitors would stand in front of that case for minutes at a time, sometimes longer, just staring at these simple objects and remembering or imagining or trying to understand what had happened on that stage. Children who had never heard of the Grammy Awards, who had not even been born when Prince and Michael were alive, would ask their parents about the guitar pick and the glove, and their parents would try to explain about rivalry and respect, about competition and collaboration, about two artists who had been told they could not coexist but who chose, for one perfect night, to prove everyone wrong. The story spread the way all great stories do, person to person, generation to generation, changing slightly with each retelling but maintaining its essential truth. The details might shift. Some people remembered the crowd as being larger, others smaller. Some said the performance lasted 3 minutes, others swore it was 10. But everyone who told the story agreed on the important parts. The silence before Prince walked down that aisle, the challenge in his voice, the grace in Michael's response, the moment when their voices blended at that shared microphone, the handshake, the exchange of talismans. These elements remained constant because they were what mattered, what made the story worth telling, worth remembering, worth passing on. In a world that increasingly tried to divide artists into categories, into genres, into competing camps, the story of that Grammy night reminded people that greatness could recognize greatness, that rivals could also be collaborators, that the most powerful moments often came not from carefully planned productions but from spontaneous acts of courage and creativity. Michael and Prince never publicly discussed the details of that night. Interviewers asked, fans speculated, music historians analyzed, but the two men themselves remained largely silent on the subject. Michael would smile when asked about it and say only that it was a special moment, that Prince was an incredible talent, that he was honored to have shared the stage with him. Prince, in his typically enigmatic way, would deflect questions, change the subject, or give answers so cryptic they created more questions than they resolved. This silence was not secretive or protective. It was reverent. Both men understood that some experiences were cheapened by too much discussion, that the magic of what they had created would be diminished if they tried to explain it, analyze it, or reduce it to a series of quotes in a magazine article. So they let it exist as it was. A perfect, unexplained moment that belonged as much to the people who witnessed it as to the artists who created it. The audience that night had been part of something rare, and both Michael and Prince respected that enough to leave the memory untouched by commercial exploitation or excessive publicity. In the recording of that Grammy performance, which was broadcast live and later released on various compilations and retrospectives, there is a moment that viewers often miss on first viewing, but that becomes more powerful with each subsequent watch. It happens about 2/3 of the way through the performance, when Michael is in the middle of an extended vocal run and Prince is playing a particularly complex progression on the piano. For just a fraction of a second, both men turn their heads and look directly at each other. The expression on their faces is identical. Pure joy. Not the joy of winning or defeating an opponent, but the joy of creation, of collaboration, of being matched by someone who understands and challenges you to be better. That look, captured by a camera operator who happened to be in exactly the right position at exactly the right moment, became an iconic image, reproduced on posters, in coffee table books, in documentaries and retrospectives. It was a look that transcended music, transcended celebrity, and spoke to something fundamental about human connection and mutual respect. People who had never experienced a rivalry, who had never performed on a stage or created art at that level, could still understand what that look meant because they had felt echoes of it in their own lives. Moments when they had found someone who matched them, challenged them, made them better simply by existing. The legacy of that night extended far beyond the two artists who created it. Young musicians watching at home saw what was possible when ego was set aside in favor of artistry. They saw that collaboration could be more powerful than competition, that different styles could complement rather than conflict. Some of those young musicians would go on to have careers of their own, and they would cite that Grammy performance as the moment they understood what music could really be, what it could do, how it could transform both the performers and the audience. The performance became a benchmark, a standard by which other collaborations were judged. When artists from different genres came together, when rivals set aside their differences to create something new, the comparison was inevitable. Critics and fans alike would ask if the new collaboration captured the same magic, the same spontaneity, the same perfect balance of planned and unplanned elements. Most did not, because most could not. What Michael and Prince had done that night required not just talent but courage, not just skill but a willingness to be vulnerable, to risk failure in front of 80,000 people and millions more watching at home. The music industry changed dramatically in the years that followed. Technology evolved, distribution methods transformed, the very definition of what it meant to be a successful artist shifted and reshaped itself. But through all these changes, the story of that Grammy night remained relevant, remained powerful, remained a reminder of why people fell in love with music in the first place. It was not about the awards or the sales figures or the chart positions. It was about the moment when sound became emotion, when performance became communion, when two human beings connected with each other and with their audience in a way that transcended all the business and machinery of the industry. That Grammy night proved that such moments were still possible, that even in the highly commercialized, carefully controlled world of modern entertainment, there was still room for spontaneity, for risk, for the kind of magic that could not be manufactured or predicted or reproduced. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more untold stories about the legends who shaped music history. Your support helps us continue sharing these incredible moments that deserve to be remembered. In the small town where Prince grew up, there is a music school that bears his name. In one of the practice rooms, hanging on the wall in a simple frame, is a photograph of Prince and Michael Jackson shaking hands on that Grammy stage. Below the photograph is a quote that Prince once gave in an interview years after that night, one of the few times he spoke directly about what happened. "Michael and I were never enemies," he said. "We were mirror images, different reflections of the same dedication to music." That night at the Grammys, we stopped looking at each other as competition and started looking at each other as collaborators. That is what I hope young musicians learn. Your greatest rival can also be your greatest ally. Students at that school spend hours in that practice room, sometimes deliberately choosing it over others because they like being in the presence of that photograph, that quote, that reminder of what is possible when artists choose creation over competition. They practice their scales and their chord progressions, and sometimes they look up at that photograph and wonder what it must have felt like to stand on that stage, to make that music, to be part of that moment. Some of them dream of creating their own version of it someday, their own spontaneous collaboration that becomes legendary. Others simply appreciate it for what it was, a perfect moment that belongs to the past but continues to inspire the future. Michael Jackson's estate eventually published a book about his life, and in it, there was a chapter dedicated to collaborations and creative partnerships. The Grammy night with Prince received only a single paragraph, but every word was carefully chosen, clearly written by someone who wanted to honor the memory without exploiting it. The paragraph ended with a simple sentence. Some nights change everything, and you know it while it is happening. That sentence captured something essential about the experience, the awareness in the moment that what was occurring was special, that it would be remembered, that it mattered. Both Michael and Prince had lived lives full of extraordinary moments, performances that broke records, innovations that changed music forever. But that Grammy night stood apart because it was unplanned, unrehearsed, and completely authentic. In a career built on precision and preparation, it was the spontaneous that became most memorable. In an industry obsessed with control and predictability, it was the unexpected that became legendary. The final image, the one that people carried with them when they left that museum exhibit, when they finished watching the recording, when they stopped telling the story to their children and grandchildren, was not of the performance itself. It was of the two men backstage, standing in that hallway, exchanging their talismans in silence. The purple guitar pick changing hands. The white glove disappearing into a jacket pocket. Two artists who had conquered the world separately choosing, for one moment, to acknowledge what they had accomplished together. That image, whether people had seen it directly or simply imagined it based on the stories they heard, became the emotional center of the entire narrative. It was intimate and private in a way that the public performance could never be. It was proof that beyond the cameras and the crowds and the industry machinery, there were two human beings who recognized each other, respected each other, and in their own quiet way, loved what the other represented. That Grammy night gave the world an unforgettable performance, but it gave Michael and Prince something even more valuable. The knowledge that they were not alone, that somewhere in the world was another person who understood the burden and the blessing of being exceptional, and that person was not an enemy but a brother in the truest sense of the word.